Boom! The letter hit my mailbox like a grenade, shattering the peace of my lakeside life. I'm Jake, a 38-year-old mechanic who spent the last decade fixing cars by day and escaping to the water by dusk. My pride and joy, a 25-foot fishing boat named Serenity, docked right in my backyard, where the shimmering Lake Crestwood kisses the edge of my property. That boat isn't just fiberglass and motorites my sanctuary, my ticket to freedom, where the stress of the world melts away with every ripple on the water. I'd spent countless weekends restoring her, sanding down every scratch, polishing her hull until she gleamed like a mirror under the sun. To me, Serenity was perfect. But to the Homeowners Association HOA, she was an eyesore. It was a golden Saturday afternoon, the kind where the air smells like fresh grass and barbecues. I was tinkering with Serenity's engine, humming along to some classic rock, when my neighbor Tom waved from his porch. "Hey Jake, you got mail from the HOA," he called, pointing to my mailbox. I wiped the grease off my hands and strolled over, expecting another newsletter about lawn maintenance or holiday decorations. Instead, I pulled out a crisp, official-looking envelope with the HOAS logo stamped in bold red. My stomach did a little flip. Something about that envelope screamed trouble. I tore it open, and my eyes scanned the words. "Dear Mr. Thompson, your boat, docked at 47 Lakeview Drive, violates Section 3.2 of the HOA bylaws regarding community aesthetics. You are hereby ordered to remove it within 48 hours or face a fine of $500 per day." My jaw hit the ground. Aesthetics. Serenity was no rusty junker. She was a beauty, with a sleek white hull and navy blue accents that matched the lake's colors perfectly. I'd even added custom LED lights for nighttime cruises, the kind that made kids point and adults nod in approval. This wasn't about aesthetics. This was personal. I knew exactly who was behind it. Karen Mitchell, the new HOA board president. Karen was the kind of person who'd measure your grass with a ruler and send you a violation notice if it was half an inch too long. Our beef started 6 months ago when I parked my pickup truck in her designated guest parking spot for a single day while my driveway was being repaved. She'd left a passive-aggressive note on my windshield, calling it inconsiderate behavior. I apologized, moved the truck, and thought that was the end of it. But Karen's glares at neighborhood barbecues and her snide comments about my loud boat told me she wasn't over it. This letter, it was her revenge. I stormed inside, my heart pounding, and read the letter again, hoping I'd misunderstood. Nope, clear as day, remove the boat or pay up. $500 a day. I'm a mechanic, not a millionaire. That kind of fine would drain my savings in a month. I paced my living room, the hardwood creaking under my work boots, and tried to calm down. Serenity wasn't just a hobby, it was part of my life. I'd bought her 5 years ago after a rough divorce, pouring my heart into fixing her up. Every fishing trip, every sunset cruise with friends, every quiet moment alone on the water, it was Serenity that kept me grounded. And now, Karen and her HOA cronies wanted to take that away. I decided to fight back. The next evening, I put on my cleanest flannel shirt and headed to the HOA meeting at the community center. The room smelled like stale coffee and cheap air freshener, packed with neighbors in folding chairs, most of them sipping from styrofoam cups. Karen sat at the front, her perfectly pressed blazer and smug smile making my blood boil. I raised my hand during the open forum and stood up, holding the letter like a weapon. "This is about my boat," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Serenity is on my property, well-maintained, and doesn't block anyone's view. Why the sudden issue?" Karen's eyes narrowed, but her smile didn't budge. "Jake, the bylaws are clear. Boats detract from the community's aesthetic standards. We've had complaints. I scanned the room, searching for guilty faces. But most people avoided my gaze. I pressed on. "I'll repaint it. Move it closer to my house. Whatever you want. Let's work this out." A few neighbors nodded, but Karen cut in. "Rules are rules, Jake. Remove it, or the fines start Monday." The room went quiet. A couple of her loyal followers or retirees who treated the HOA like their personal kingdom clapped like trained seals. I felt my face flush, anger bubbling up. They weren't just attacking my boat, they were attacking my freedom. As I walked home under the starry sky, the lake reflecting the moon like a silver mirror, I realized reasoning with Karen was pointless. She wanted control, not compromise. But then, standing on my dock, staring at Serenity, I noticed something. My backyard wasn't just a patch of grass, it extended to the edge of the community marina, where every HOA member docked their fancy yachts and speedboats for their weekend getaways. I pulled out my phone and checked my property deed online, my heart racing. Sure enough, a narrow strip of my land controlled the only walkway to the marina's main dock. The HOA had been using it for years, assuming it was theirs. Big mistake. A wild, reckless idea formed in my mind. If they wanted to play dirty, I'd play smarter. They wanted my boat gone. Fine, I'd make sure their precious marina was off limits until they backed off. The HOA's ultimatum lit a fire in me. But I wasn't about to let Karen and her clipboard-wielding minions dictate my life. Sitting on my porch, the lake sparkling under the moonlight, I stared at Serenity bobbing gently at my dock. That boat wasn't just a possession, it was my freedom, my refuge after long days wrenching under cars. The idea of hauling her away because of Karen's petty vendetta made my blood boil. But I'm not the type to punch a wall or yell into the void. I'm a planner, a problem solver. If the HOA wanted to play hardball, I'd hit back with strategy. Not shouting, I grabbed a beer from the fridge and spread out my property deed on the kitchen table, the paper crinkling under my calloused hands. The deed was a labyrinth of legal jargon, but I'd learned to read these things when I bought the house 10 years ago. My eyes zeroed in on the property boundaries, and there it was, a narrow 20-foot wide strip of land that ran from my backyard to the edge of the community marina. That strip was the only walkway connecting the neighborhood to the main dock, where every HOA member parked their shiny yachts and speedboats for their weekend joyrides. For years, they'd traipsed across it, assuming it was public property. Big mistake. That strip was mine, clear as day in black and white ink. I leaned back, my mind racing. The marina was the HOA's crown jewel. Karen and her cronies loved flaunting their boats' gleaming vessels with names like Prosperity and Sunset Majesty at their fancy cocktail cruises. If I controlled access, I held the keys to their playground. A wild idea sparked. What if I blocked that walkway? No access, no boats, no parties. They'd be stranded, their precious marina useless. It was bold, maybe even a little crazy, but it felt like poetic justice. They wanted to mess with my boat. I'd mess with theirs. First, I needed to be sure I was on solid ground legally, not just morally. I called up my buddy Mike, a lawyer, who owed me a favor after I fixed his vintage Mustang for free. Mike, I said, pacing my living room, can the HOA stop me from fencing my own land? I emailed him the deed and survey map, my heart pounding as I waited for his reply. An hour later, he called back, chuckling. Jake, you're golden. That strip's yours. You can build a fortress if you want. The HOA's got no claim, unless they've got an easement, and I don't see one here. I double-checked the deed, no easement, no shared access, nothing. The HOA had been trespassing on my land for years, and they didn't even know it. Emboldened, I started planning the execution. A fence was the obvious move, something tall, sturdy, and impossible to ignore. I spent the next morning researching fencing companies online, scrolling through websites on my beat-up laptop. Chainlink wouldn't cut it. I needed something that screamed, stay out. I found a local company, Crestwood Fencing, that specialized in heavy-duty steel barriers. Their site boasted about industrial-grade security solutions, complete with photos of gleaming 10-foot-tall fences that looked like they belonged around a military base. Perfect. I called them up, my voice steady but buzzing with excitement. I need a fence. Fast. I told the guy on the phone, a gruff-sounding dude named Tony. 10 feet high, steel, with a locked gate. Can you do it by next week? Tony asked for details, and I explained the situation. I nest the part about my vendetta against the HOA. It's my property, I said, and I want it secured. He quoted me a price steep but worth every penny if it meant sticking it to Karen. I gave him the go-ahead, and he promised his crew would be out in 3 days. Make it sturdy, I added. I don't want anyone climbing over it. Tony laughed. Buddy, this thing'll stop a tank. Next, I needed to think about the lock. A flimsy padlock wouldn't do. Karen would probably hire some kid with bolt cutters to snip it off. I drove to the hardware store and picked out a beast of a padlock, the kind you'd use to secure a bank vault. It was the size of a grapefruit, with a thick steel shackle that gleamed under the store's fluorescent lights. The clerk raised an eyebrow as I plopped it on the counter. Locking up something big, he asked. I just grinned. You could say that. Back home, I walked the property line to visualize the plan. The strip was narrow but critical, a bottleneck that funneled everyone to the marina's dock. I imagined the fence going up, cutting off their access, their boats trapped like fish in a net. The thought made me chuckle, but I also felt a twinge of nerves. This wasn't just a prank, it was a declaration of war. The HOA wouldn't take it lying down. Karen would come at me with everything she had. Fines, lawyers, maybe even a public shaming at the next meeting. I had to be ready. I spent the next 2 days preparing. I took photos of the property line, marked it with stakes, and even printed out a copy of the deed to keep handy. I called Mike again to triple-check my legal standing. You're airtight, Jake, he said. Just don't start a riot. I laughed, but part of me wondered if it would come to that. The neighborhood was full of Karen's loyalists, people who'd nod along to her every whim. But there were also folks like Tom, my neighbor, who'd grumbled about the HOA's overreach for years. Maybe I'd have allies. As the fencing company's arrival date loomed, I felt a mix of excitement and dread. This was my stand, my line in the sand. The HOA thought they could bully me into submission, but they'd underestimated me. I wasn't just protecting Serenity, I was protecting my right to live my life on my terms. The fence would be my message, loud and clear: mess with me and you'll regret it. I went to bed the night before the crew arrived, staring at the ceiling, picturing Karen's face when she saw her precious Marina locked away. This was going to be epic. The morning the fencing crew rolled in, I woke up with a grin I couldn't wipe off. It was like Christmas, except instead of presents, I was about to deliver a steel-plated reality check to the HOA. I'm Jake, a guy who spent years wrenching under cars, so I'm no stranger to getting my hands dirty. But today, my hands were clean. I was letting the professionals do the dirty work, and oh, was it going to be glorious. The sun was barely up, painting Lake Crestwood in shades of orange and pink, when the rumble of trucks echoed down my street. Crestwood Fencing had arrived, right on schedule. Their flatbeds loaded with gleaming steel panels that caught the dawn's light like a warning flare. I stepped onto my porch, coffee mug in hand, as the crew 6 guys in neon vests and hard hats loaded their gear. Tony, the gruff foreman I'd spoken to on the phone, gave me a nod. You sure about this, Jake? He asked, eyeing the narrow strip of land between my backyard and the Marina's walkway. This'll stir up some noise. I smirked. That's the point, Tony. Let's make it loud. He chuckled, shaking his head, and barked orders at his team. Drills whirred, hammers clanged, and within an hour, the first steel posts were sinking into my property like the opening move in a chess game. The fence was a beast, 10 feet tall, solid steel, with a sleek black finish that screamed, "Don't even think about it." Each panel locked into the next with a satisfying clunk, forming an impenetrable wall across the Marina's access path. I'd chosen the spot carefully, the exact point where the walkway narrowed, ensuring no one could squeeze by without trespassing further onto my land. As the crew worked, I paced the property line, my heart pounding with a mix of adrenaline and glee. This wasn't just a fence. It was a statement. The HOA thought they could bully me into moving Serenity. I was about to lock their entire Marina away. By noon, the fence was half up, and the neighborhood started to notice. My neighbor Tom, a retired teacher with a fishing boat of his own, wandered over, his eyes wide. "Jake, what the hell's this?" he asked, gesturing at the growing barrier. I leaned against a post, casual as could be. "Just securing my property, Tom. HOA has been using my land for years without asking. Time to set things right." He scratched his head, a slow grin spreading. "You're nuts, man, but I kinda love it." Tom wasn't alone. Other neighbors, dog walkers, joggers, even kids on bikes started gathering, their whispers forming a low hum. "Is that allowed? Who's gonna get to the Marina now? Karen's gonna lose it." They weren't wrong. At 2 p.m., as the crew bolted the final panel into place and hung a massive steel gate, Karen's SUV screeched to a halt at the curb. She stormed out, her blazer pristine but her face red as a tomato. "Jake Thompson," she shrieked, marching toward me like a general leading a charge. "What is this monstrosity?" I stood by the gate, holding the grapefruit-sized padlock I'd bought, its weight reassuring in my hand. "It's a fence, Karen," I said, calm as the lake on a windless day. "On my property, you got a problem with that?" I clicked the padlock shut with a loud snap, the sound echoing like a gunshot. Karen's eyes bulged. "You can't block the Marina. This is illegal. Outrageous." She waved her phone, probably itching to call the cops or her lawyer, or both. I pulled out my deed, folded neatly in my back pocket, and held it up. "This says otherwise. This strip's mine. Karen, you've been trespassing for years. Want access? Let's talk about my boat." Her mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. No words coming out. The crowd now, a good 20 neighbors murmured, some nodding, others looking nervous. I could feel the tide shifting. Karen wasn't used to being challenged, and it showed. She tried to rally. "This affects the entire community. Jake, you're being selfish." Selfish, that was rich, coming from the woman who'd slapped me with $500 daily fines for my boat. I crossed my arms. "You started this, Karen. You want your yachts back. Drop the fines and let Serenity stay." She sputtered, turning to the crowd for support. But only her usual cronies to retirees who lived for HOA meetings. The rest looked torn, their weekend boating plans flashing before their eyes. Tom piped up, "Maybe you should have talked to Jake first, Karen." A few others murmured agreement, and I swear, I saw her flinch. The crew finished up, packing their tools as the sun dipped low, casting long shadows from the fence. It looked even more imposing now, a fortress cutting off the Marina's sparkling docks, where boats bobbed uselessly. I thanked Tony, who gave me a knowing wink. "Good luck, man. You're gonna need it." As the trucks pulled away, I sat on my porch, sipping my now-cold coffee, watching frustrated boaters wander to the fence. One guy, a lawyer type, with a yacht named Golden Horizon, tried shaking the gate. No dice. The padlock held firm, and I couldn't help but laugh. Karen wasn't done. She stood by the fence, taking photos and muttering about legal action. I wasn't worried. Mike, my lawyer friend, had already confirmed my rights. This was my land, my move. The HOAS boats were trapped. Their weekend cruises canceled, their egos bruised. I leaned back, the porch swing creaking, and watched the chaos unfold. For the first time since that letter arrived, I felt in control. Karen thought she could bully me, but she'd underestimated a guy with a boat, a deed, and a whole lot of stubborn. This was just the beginning. The fence stood like a steel middle finger to the HOA, and let me tell you, it didn't take long for the fallout to hit. I'm Jake, a guy who spent years fixing cars and dodging drama. But now I was in the middle of a neighborhood war, and it felt like I'd kicked a hornet's nest. The morning after the fence went up, my inbox was flooded with emails from the HOA, each one more unhinged than the last. Cease this disruption immediately. Read the first. Signed by Karen Mitchell, HOA president, and my personal nemesis. Another threatened fines, $200 for obstructing community access. Then $300 for visual nuisance. And by day 3, a laughable $500 for undermining community harmony. I deleted them all, grinning. They thought fines would scare me. I was already facing $500 a day for serenity. They'd have to do better than that. By day 2, Karen escalated. A courier dropped off a cease and desist letter, hand-delivered to my doorstep like it was a royal decree. The paper was thick. The HOA logo, embossed in red, but the content was pure bluster. Remove the obstruction or face legal action. I called Mike, my lawyer friend, and read it to him. He laughed so hard, I thought he'd choke on his coffee. Jake, they've got nothing, he said. No easement, no public right-of-way. That land's yours. This is just Karen flexing. I faxed him the letter, and by evening, he'd fired back a response that shut them down, citing my deed and local property laws. The HOA's legal threats were as toothless as a gummy bear. But Karen wasn't done. On day 3, she tried a new tactic, public shaming. I woke up to a flyer taped to every mailbox in the neighborhood, titled Community Alert, Selfish Actions, Harm Us All. It didn't name me, but the jab was clear. One resident's unauthorized barrier is denying access to our cherished marina. Cherished, more like their ego-stroking yacht club. The flyer urged neighbors to voice their concerns at an emergency HOA meeting that night. I chuckled, tossing it in the trash. Karen thought she could rally the troops, but she'd underestimated how fed up people were with her rulebook tyranny. The neighborhood was buzzing. And not just with Karen's propaganda. From my porch, I watched boaters gather at the fence. Staring longingly at their trapped yachts, a guy in a polo shirt, who I recognized as the owner of Golden Horizon, kicked the gate, cursing under his breath. Another, a retiree with a sailboat, just shook his head and walked away. My neighbor Tom, the retired teacher, swung by with a beer and a grin. "You've got balls, Jake," he said, clinking his bottle against mine. "Half the neighborhood's cheering you on. Karen's been lording over us too long." But not everyone was Team Jake. Karen's loyalists, mostly older folks who treated HOA meetings like church, glared at me from their lawns, whispering to each other like I was the town villain. That evening, I skipped the HOA meeting. No point arguing with Karen's fan club. Instead, I got a play-by-play from Tom, who went out of curiosity. He texted me updates. "Karen's calling you a disruptor." Crowds split. Apparently, she'd stood at the podium, waving her flyer like a battle flag, claiming my fence was an attack on community spirit. Community spirit. Give me a break. This was the same woman who'd once fined a family for putting up a basketball hoop. Tom said some neighbors defended me, arguing the HOA had overreached with my boat. Others, the ones who lived for their weekend cruises, demanded I tear the fence down. Karen promised swift action, but Tom texted a laughing emoji. "She's got nothing, man, keep it up." By day 5, Karen tried a new angle. The sob story. She knocked on my door, her usual smugness replaced with a fake smile and a plate of store-bought cookies. "Jake," she said, her voice dripping with forced sincerity. "I know we got off on the wrong foot. The marina is vital to our community's spirit. Can't we work this out?" I leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "Sure, Karen. Drop the boat fines, and we'll talk." Her smile vanished. "The rules exist for a reason," she snapped, dropping the act. I shrugged. "Then, the fence stays." She stormed off, cookies and all, and I knew I'd hit a nerve. The next day, a cop car rolled up, and my stomach did a flip. Karen had called the sheriff, claiming my fence was a public safety hazard. The deputy, a guy I'd met at a local diner, looked at the deed, walked the property line, and shook his head. "This is civil, not criminal," he told Karen, who'd shown up to gloat. "Take it to court." She looked like she'd been slapped. I thanked the deputy, who winked, and said, "Nice fence. Score another point for Jake." The pressure was mounting, but so was the HOA's desperation. By week's end, neighbors were openly picking sides. Tom and a few others started a group chat called Free the Marina, half joking, half supporting my stand. Others left passive-aggressive notes in my mailbox. Think of the community. I ignored them, sitting on my porch each evening, watching boaters glare at the fence. Their frustration was palpable, and I'd be lying if I said it didn't feel good. Karen had started this war, but I was winning the battles. Serenity was still docked, gleaming in my backyard. and the HOA was running out of moves. They couldn't hold out forever, not when their precious boats were trapped, and their egos were taking a bigger hit than their wallets. 2 weeks after my steel fortress went up, the HOA's resolve started to crack like cheap paint on a hot day. I'm Jake, a guy who spent years fixing cars and dodging drama. But this fight with the HOA had turned me into the neighborhood's unlikely rebel. The Marina, once the HOA's pride and joy, was a ghost town, yachts and speedboats bobbing uselessly behind my locked gate. Every day, I'd sit on my porch, coffee in hand, watching frustrated boaters pace the fence line. Their weekend plans drowned in the reality of my stand. Karen, the HOA president, had tried everything. Fines, legal threats, even a pathetic plate of cookies. But I held firm, my deed and lawyer backing me up. Now, the tide was turning, and victory was so close I could taste it. It started with a phone call from Tom, my neighbor and unofficial ally. Jake, they're calling an emergency meeting tonight, he said, his voice buzzing with excitement. Karen's losing it. Half the board wants to negotiate. I leaned back in my chair, staring at Serenity gleaming at my dock. The boat that started this war was still there, untouched, a symbol of my defiance. I knew the HOA was desperate. 2 weeks without their precious Marina had hit them hard. Neighbors who lived for their yacht parties were grumbling, and even loyalists were wavering. I grabbed my deed, folded it into my jacket, and headed to the community center, ready to end this once and for all. The meeting room was packed, the air thick with tension and the faint smell of stale coffee. Neighbors filled every folding chair, some whispering, others glaring. Karen sat at the front, her blazer crisp but her face pinched, like she'd been sucking lemons all week. I walked in, head high, and took a seat near the back, my deed burning a hole in my pocket. The crowd parted like I was carrying dynamite. Tom gave me a thumbs up from across the room, while Karen's cronies, 2 retirees who lived for her, every word shot me death stares. The meeting started, and Karen stood, her voice tight. We're here to address the Marina access issue, she said, avoiding my name. We're willing to reconsider the boat rule to restore community harmony. I nearly laughed out loud. Reconsider. That was code for we're losing, and we know it. I stood, raising my hand, and every eye in the room snapped to me. Let's cut to the chase. Karen, I said, my voice steady but loud enough to carry. You tried to bully me into moving Serenity with your fines and threats. Now your boats are stuck because you've been trespassing on my land for years. Here's my deal. My boat stays. You drop all fines, and you pay for my fence installation. The room erupted in gasps and murmurs. Karen's face went red, her hands gripping the podium like she was holding back a scream. Jake, you're holding the community hostage, she snapped, trying to rally her troops. But the crowd wasn't buying it. A woman in the front row, who owned a sailboat, stood up. Karen, maybe if you hadn't pushed Jake so hard, we wouldn't be here. A few others clapped, and I felt a surge of pride. Tom jumped in, his voice calm but firm. The HOA has been overstepping for years. Jake's just standing up for his rights. More nods, more murmurs. Karen's allies tried to argue, but the room was shifting. People were tired of her iron fist rules, and my fence had exposed her weakness. Karen tried one last jab. We'll take this to court, she said, but her voice wavered. I pulled out my deed and held it up. Go ahead, Karen, my lawyer's ready, and this says I own that land. You've got no case. Mike had warned me she might try this bluff, but the HOA's budget was already stretched thin from legal fees on other petty disputes. They couldn't afford a long fight, and everyone knew it. The board members whispered among themselves, their faces grim. Finally, one of them, a quiet guy named Steve who rarely spoke, stood up. Let's vote, he said. All in favor of Jake's terms. The room went silent. Hands shot up, first Tom, then the sailboat lady, then a dozen others. Even some of Karen's loyalists, desperate to get their boats back, raised their hands. Karen's jaw dropped, her eyes darting like a cornered animal. The vote was nearly unanimous. Fine, she muttered, barely audible. The boat rule's gone. Fines dropped. We'll cover the fence. I leaned back, a grin spreading across my face. Victory. The next morning, a check for the fence installation arrived, along with a formal letter canceling all fines. The HOA even rewrote the bylaws, adding a clause allowing boats on private docks. I unlocked the gate, the padlock clunking open, and watched as boaters rushed to their yachts, some waving thanks as they passed. Karen avoided me, but I didn't care. Serenity sat proudly at my dock, gleaming under the sun, untouched by her petty rules. Now, every weekend, I take Serenity out on the lake, cruising past Karen's house with a wave and a smile. She glares from her porch, but she's powerless. The neighborhood's changed. People talk more, question the HOA's rules, even push back at meetings. Tom says I'm a hero, but I just wanted my boat and my freedom. The HOA learned the hard way. Don't mess with a man's boat. I played their game, used their own tactics against them, and won. And every time I fire up Serenity's engine, the rumble feels like victory.